Hello, I'm Penny Thornton and I'm talking astrology. On this particular video, I'm going to be talking about predicting the future. And I'm going to be looking at the way astrologers or the techniques astrologers have to really give us this view of what's coming ahead. It's going to be in two parts, even though it's all on the same video. So the first part is really the various systems astrologers use to predict the future, so to speak. And the second part is really looking at things sign by sign, whether that means looking at your sun sign or your ascending sign, and seeing the way currently things are looking, how astrologers are viewing your sun sign or your ascending sign, and taking it just a little bit into the future as well. Now, I know a lot of you just love that, so that you scoot towards, your sun sign or your rising sign so that you can get the personalized information that you like. But I would recommend going right through the video, even if it takes you a couple of goes, just so that you get a much better idea of what predicting the future means. How do we go about it, And I think also in my work, especially when I'm working with my clients, or perhaps I get emails from you, I know that so often you go to an astrology portal and something is said there that really scares the pants off you, and you really, really worry about that. And astrology should never be scary. I mean, I make it my personal safari to not make people scared about astrology, because the one thing astrology teaches you, the more you get into it, is that as the planets evolve in their cycles, they continue to move forward, forming different relationships with each other endlessly. And humanity, too, is evolving. You can see that it's a kind of narrative as we evolve. We're being, our story is being told by the planets. More than anything else, what astrology becomes is a guide. Maybe we can see Pluto coming up to conjoin our natal sun, and we think, oh my goodness, what is that going to mean? Well, my kind of astrology teaches you what does it mean and how best to prepare for that, how to work with it, as opposed to absolutely fearing what may happen to you because of it. So take the trouble to look at the first part, because that'll give you a much better overall picture of astrologers and prediction generally. And of course, if you're a student of astrology, or even if you've been practicing astrology for a while, it's quite good to get someone's take on how we do all this. What techniques do we use? What do we rely on? So let's start from the beginning and say straight off the bat, astrologers do not see things in the constellations. Let me show you a picture of that. So when we, as the picture shows you can see a man on a mountain, that's our astrologer looking up at the constellations. It's a beautiful picture. And astronomy is a hugely important part of astrology. Without the constellations, without the planets themselves and the relationships they have with each other and us on planet Earth, we wouldn't be able to do astrology at all. But what I want to make clear is that astrologers don't see events in the celestial sphere. We don't see them as though there was this giant kind of movie screen and all the events that relate to a particular pattern are written for us. We can see it. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't astrologers who are clairvoyant. They do see images, they do see the future, or astrologers that are clairaudient. They hear voices, and that way they interpret the astrology that they're seeing. But in the main part, this is why we can teach astrology, is that it is about looking at the planets, their relationships with each other, where they'll be on any given day, and making an interpretation about that. So this is really what astrology is all about. It's about the solar system and the relationship of all the various planets with each other, and of course, in relation to the sun, Mercury, and so on and so forth. So you can see Earth there, the little blue Earth with, I think that's South America on it. And this is what we're concerned with. And the big orbits that we can see in those ellipses, those movements around the sun, are where we get our information from. And the way that information appears, looking at the planets on a piece of paper, their movements, and as I've just shown you in the page from the ephemeris, is something akin to what Nostradamus would have been looking at all those centuries ago. Maybe it's not on quite that same format, but he would be studying the movements of the planets. Where he made his great predictions was a combination of where the planets actually were according to their planetary plan, but also through a system called scrying, which means he looked into water and saw images, which he then was able to put to the various future times. Now, we get into a lot of trouble, really, with astrology when we think that we could look 100 years from now. The planets are predictably in this place, in this sign, and they will be having that relationship with another planet. We can look at that in 2348 if we want. But what is the world going to be like over 100 years from now? Can you imagine being an astrologer in 1900, for instance? Unimaginable what inventions and how we will be living 100 years from then. So it's quite difficult to make predictions. And if we come back to Nostradamus again and we think about the scrying technique that he used to peer into water and allow his unconscious mind and his kind of psychic senses, if you like, to join in with the astrology, he therefore glimpsed things that he couldn't understand, and he had a shot at explaining what he saw. And then, of course, as far as Nostradamus is concerned, the way he wrote his predictions, they were all kind of couched in doggerel and kind of strange mysticism, anagrams, all sorts of things, in part because, of course, there was a body of opinion that thought anything to do with seeing the future was akin to witchcraft, and therefore you'd suffer from the Inquisition. So this is why he couched his predictions in those terms. Now, we today have a different way of looking ahead in time. And as astrologers like myself, who actually come out into public and make predictions and statements, then what we tend to do is to still give an option as to how certain configurations may turn out. And because really and truly, sometimes when you're giving a prediction, you wouldn't want to offend somebody or to make somebody concerned with their future. It has to be said in a way that gives room to maneuver. And also a very other important point about astrologers making predictions, not only 100 years from now, where we wouldn't understand what life was like, but also, I think, the idea that if something happens in one country that reflects a certain pattern or a certain constellation of planetary movements, we may not be looking at that country specifically. And astrologers need natal charts. They need charts of where you are in order to be able to make a prediction. And I know that sometimes this can make us look really as though we don't know what we're talking about because we failed to predict the pandemic, for instance. And I'll come on to that shortly. But as I said, we're looking at a whole kind of pattern of aspects between the planets. And we're looking back in time, hundreds of years ago sometimes, and tracing it through the ages to see, oh, this pattern equals that event. But of course, humanity is evolving too, so you're never going to get an identikit set of events, even if the material is the same and the things that it does, like changing society or whatever else it may do, is the same. It's just the hows that sometimes it's very, very difficult for astrologers to see. In terms of the techniques that astrologers use to predict the future, there's sort of two main branches. One of them is called progressions, and the other is called, well, transits. That means for progressions, it's a symbolic movement of the planets forward in time from the day of birth. In other words, a day for a year. So if you're born on a certain day, the next day represents the next year of life, right the way through until maybe you're 80 or so. You'll have moved 80 days forward, 80 years forward. And what we see when we're looking at progressions is really a seed pattern unfolding. So that these are the seeds of your fate, if you like. This is what you are born with. This is how things are meant to go according to plan. So progressions are very important in the idea of your fate evolving. However, as you may remember a little while ago, I talked about astrology without fear. We need to insert ourselves into the astrology. Transits, that means where the planets are on any given day in the sky, so to speak. Transits, these are the kind of things that happen on a day-to-day, year-by-year basis to us. And this has much more to do with the choices we make and therefore the free will that we have. So yes, an event occurs and it's in line with something we see, maybe Saturn conjunct our sun or a particular eclipse or whatever it may be. But it's the knowledge of that ahead of time and thinking, what does this mean in general? How can I prepare for it? How can I make the most of it when it occurs? So transits work almost on a kind of circumstantial level, for want of a better word, whereas your progressions are your seed pattern. And there are different forms of progressions by solar arc, moving everything forward, by the speed of the sun, a day for a year, which is literally taking a day for a year. We have tertiary progressions, which are like a month for a year. And then there are things like solar returns. In fact, you can have a return of any planet, Mars, Venus, you name it. And particularly with a solar return, which a lot of people like to do every year, the sun returns to its original position on your birthday. And then you have a look at what's going on in that particular arrangement, and you make your predictions accordingly. What areas of the chart are being brought out? What aspects are most important? That kind of thing. But of course, when we think about a solar return, it is really merely a reflection of the transits of the time, which again sort of takes me rather more to the idea that transits in a way are a much better way of predicting the future or of looking at what's happening in the now. Now, again, when it comes to the way I work, for instance, and I'm looking at the position of the sun, the moon, Mercury, Venus, and Mars, the personal planets, looking at them in relation to the slower moving planets, that's Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. These are the things that make for dramatic differences, both in terms of global events and also in terms of our own lives as well. It's the cycles of the slower moving planets that are really, really important in terms of predicting the future. And this is in two ways. We look at the changes of sign for the slower moving planets, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. As they move into different signs, then they have a different kind of influence. It's a progression. But also what is very important with the slower moving planets is their relationship with each other, not just the relationship of Pluto to the Sun or Pluto to Mercury, but Pluto to Jupiter, Saturn to Uranus. And these are really, really important cycles. And I'm going to talk about that in a little minute, because these are the things that I think a lot of you sort of know about a little bit. In other words, most people know about the Saturn return. In other words, where Saturn is in your natal chart, roughly 29 years later, it comes back to that original position. And it can get as many as 3 Saturn returns in your life. You get another one at 58 and another one at 87 if you live that long. And every time Saturn comes back to its original position, it's reinforcing its position in your life, what it means for you. But of course, it's coming at it at a different level. And the same really with the Uranus cycle. It's an 82-year cycle. It takes 82 years to go around your chart. And many of us are living now 82 years. And if you do, you get a Uranus reboot when you're 82. But certainly most people get a Uranus opposition, and that happens around about 42, 43, something like that. And that particular point of life is crucial. We make a lot of changes. Uranus being the planet of change, of revolution, of the unconventional. When Uranus comes knocking at our door, as it does at the Uranus square, at the Uranus opposition, particularly at the Uranus opposition, then we feel this desire to really have change in our lives. And again, because Uranus is the higher octave of the sun, it has a lot to do with expressing the self, who you uniquely are, which is why so many people change so many things about their lives, their jobs, their marriages, their life in general at that Uranus opposition. Pluto, of course, is another very important planet when we consider its cycle in terms of our lives. Pluto takes about 240 years to go around the sun, and therefore 240 years to go around our charts. And of course, none of us is going to live that long to get a Pluto return. But we certainly live long enough to get a Pluto square to its natal position and a Pluto opposition. And in fact, the Pluto square, which is happening if you're born in 1982, 1983, or 1984, is a really, really important point in life. Again, this is happening to you in your late 30s, but of course, because of the time it takes Pluto to move through that 240-year orbit, is that sometimes it scoots through signs in about 12 years, and in other signs, it's going to take longer, 20 years, even longer than that. So you can see that really a Pluto square can happen anytime between 36 years old and 61 years old. And of course, what is Pluto representing? It's bringing things from the unconscious into the conscious world. So lots of things that we're unaware of suddenly are revealed to us, and it can be very uncomfortable because we've got very used to not seeing something. And so when Pluto brings it up from the underground, we get really fazed by that. But of course, it's a process of transformation. We are always transformed by the events that force us to look deep within ourselves, force us to dig deep into our reserves in order to move forward. So a Pluto square, Pluto opposition, both of them similar in the sense that that the process they're doing, bringing what's unconscious into consciousness. It illustrates another point that's really, really important to you who are interested in astrology, or who you may be a student astrologer, that really when we look at a natal chart, for instance, and we look at the angular relationships, the aspects between the planets, we're going to take or pay a lot more attention to the conjunctions, squares, and oppositions. We're not going to worry too much about the trines and the sextiles or even the quintiles. Yes, they're there. They do demonstrate a certain ease of working together between these planets, but you're still working with each planet and its nature. And the far more dynamic effect is when you've got the conjunction, the square, or the opposition, wham, something is going to happen. An effect is noticeable. And it's the same, really, with looking at these cycles of the planets. Saturn returns, Saturn opposition Saturn, Jupiter returns, Jupiter opposition Jupiter, Pluto not returns, but Pluto opposition Pluto, square Pluto. Because these are dynamic, they're going to be much more, we're going to be much more aware of the external events that are that they preside over, and see them as very important junctures of our life. They're to do with growth and evolution, and most of them are a little bit painful, to be absolutely honest. So let's have a look at the Jupiter cycle now, because this is something that we tend to see much more clearly because it's much quicker. Of all these planets that we're looking at the movements of, Jupiter, which moves through a sign every 12 months, we're getting much more of an instantaneous picture about its nature and what it does. We have the Jupiter cycle represented as we can see. I've got the circle of the zodiac there, and if you look on the sort of outer edge of that, there's a 0 degrees at the sort of 9 o'clock position there. And then if you go anti-clockwise around the chart, you'll come to 90 degrees. That's the sort of 4th house position. Then further round, we get to 180, opposition. Finally, the 270 degrees, the final square, until we come round back to the beginning again. So this is Jupiter's journey around your chart. It's Jupiter's journey around the sun every 12-month period. And you'll see I put the years in which this is taking place. So that Jupiter is currently, at the time of recording this video, in Taurus. And it's going to take 12 years to move through every single sign of the zodiac until it comes back round to Taurus again in 2035. But at every station, that's to say 90 degrees, 180 degrees, and 270 degrees, these are important parts of this cycle to you. So when Jupiter squares its natal position, when Jupiter opposes its natal position, when it does its third point, its final square before it returns to its original position, each time Jupiter returns, it's going to reboot its natal position. And at each 90-degree point, there's a reference as to what happened in that Jupiter, when Jupiter returned to its position that year, what things were set in motion, what seeds were planted, what were the events that took place. When you look at the Jupiter square or the Jupiter opposition, it's taking you back to that point, and it's saying, how am I going? What's working? What isn't working? What do I need to throw out? What do I need to concentrate on? So you get an opportunity. And this is why I love astrology this way, because instead of making it so kind of external evidence based, it brings it back to you to have a choice when you know Jupiter is in these positions as to what you're going to take away from it. What can you take away by looking at what Jupiter represents? Growth, abundance, the things that make life good. So when Jupiter is in the sign, as it was at birth, then this is a really big year. A lot of good things tend to happen so that you feel that sense of abundance. You feel all sorts of things are potentially successful and good. So you ride with that wave when Jupiter is, with your natal Jupiter, set things in motion, which is why, as we go through the next 12 years, looking at the all-important squares and opposition, is that how many of those things really served their purpose and fulfilled, and what's worth rebooting and rekindling and making more of. That's what we get with Jupiter. But also with Jupiter, sometimes revealed to us is what's out of control. What is excessive? What do we need to look at which is running away with us, and we're out of control with something? In your Jupiter return year, especially when you've got the other planets coming around and angling Jupiter, Sun, Jupiter square, Mars, Jupiter opposition, whatever it may be, you get to see quite vividly what is out of control in your life, not just what's abundant and where you want to grow and succeed, but what is preventing you from all those good things because it's out of control in you. Come back to me, and a little while ago I mentioned the idea of predicting the future, and a lot of people say, oh, well, astrologers didn't predict the pandemic, so what use is astrology? And what is interesting about that is that of course, why astrologers if you were any kind of decent astrologer, you were going to be looking at January of 2020 and thinking, my goodness, what are we in for now? And there was also Jupiter was coming into Capricorn as well. That the Saturn-Pluto conjunction was in Capricorn, Jupiter coming to Capricorn. We could see all sorts of things evolving. most of us, like myself here, had to look back in time and think what we knew about these two planets coming together, starting their new Saturn-Pluto cycle. And so, particularly in my own case, I would look back at 1982, when the Saturn-Pluto cycle began in Libra, finished, of course, as the new one came in January of 2020 in Capricorn. The one preceding it, the cycle that closed, began in 1982. And the one before that began in 1947-48. So we look at what these periods of time had in common. We were looking at reformation. Post-war, there was a lot of reformation going on, both in the sense of countries redrawing boundaries, new countries being formed. We saw things like the National Health Service in Great Britain being formed out of that period. Great social change, social reformation. And if we come forward now to 1982, we saw a lot of reformation and changes, really more to do with East and West and the build-up of power, really, Cold War that we had with Russia and the West. And also we had the Falklands War, which was all about territory and, creating or reforming our boundaries, making sure they were there. So someone like myself looked at that and then thought, here we go, we're coming into 2020. We've got a new Saturn-Pluto cycle beginning. What are we looking at? We're looking at reformation. We're looking at land boundaries being changed. We're looking at difficulties being felt and struggles happening. Saturn being a struggle, Pluto meaning a very big and powerful struggle. Remember, Pluto brings what's unconscious into consciousness. With Saturn means we have to put form in it. We have to struggle with whatever is struggling to be born, if you like. Death and rebirth, another Pluto keyword, if you like. So for my money, when I was looking at this, using my brain as opposed to any kind of scrying method that I could employ, was the idea that maybe Putin was going to make a land grab. This was my prediction out of that Saturn-Pluto conjunction. Well, of course, as we know, this happened a little bit later in 2022, but the pandemic that, of course, gripped the entire world meant a lot of things that would have happened sooner were put on ice. So in many ways, the interpretation based on what we know before and intellectually looking at what is likely to occur is a very good, safe exercise for all astrologers to use. Now, coming back to that Saturn-Pluto conjunction, Jessica Adams, who is a psychic astrologer, and she uses a technique a little bit similar, I think, to Nostradamus. I'm sorry if I'm wrong, Jessica, but I know that you saw this virus actually psychically saw the virus, which initially Jessica interpreted as a kind of, computer virus. But nonetheless, it's that kind of psychic extra sense that gives flesh to the bones of your astrological judgments, for want of a better word. So yes, we began this new Saturn-Pluto cycle in 2020, and it's going to take us right the way through until June of 2053. You imagine that's a pretty long time before Saturn conjoins Pluto again, which it will do in Pisces on this occasion. Want to look also at that cycle of Saturn-Pluto, why it's so important and why astrologers pay a hugely, we treat a Saturn-Pluto cycle as being very, very important in global events, global trends, things affecting humanity. And we look very much in the same way as I was showing you with Jupiter, the Jupiter square, the Jupiter opposition, the Jupiter square again, the final square, being stations that give reflection, reappraisal, and a reboot, those three re's, if you like. The Saturn opposition is a hugely important time. In other words, Saturn and Pluto are now halfway through their cycle. And if we go back to 2001, and remember this cycle began in 1982, in 2001, Saturn was opposed to Pluto. We had Saturn in Gemini, Pluto in Sagittarius. So was that right, or have I got it the other way? No, I think that's right. And of course, what was so hugely memorable and significant about that Saturn-Pluto opposition was 9/11 and the events of that day, which really, really did change history and brought a whole new kind of Islamophobia, war on terror, everything really that we have still been working with really up until 2020, but maybe we're going to see some changes in that, if you like. The war on terror, definitely an East-West Muslim Islam thing. What we're getting now from the 2021 is Russia, China, that kind, Iran, that kind of grouping opposed to the West. So we have these big, big cycles that affect us all. And the war in Ukraine, as you know, has affected us all. So, of course, the next Saturn-Pluto opposition is going to be a crucial period for humanity again. And so we're looking at 2036, we're looking at the 28th of July, 2036. So the last Saturn-Pluto opposition, 9/11, we're looking at 2001, and now we've got another Saturn-Pluto opposition. But remember, it's going to be in reference to the Saturn-Pluto conjunction of 2020. So it's these things that we are living with right now, the things that were set in motion in 2020, both in terms of the pandemic and how life changed for all of us, whether it was working from home, whether it's what happened to schooling for children, our kind of view of vaccines, and then, of course, all the things that happened subsequently with the invasion of Ukraine and all of these things. We're going to see some kind of coming to a head situation in 2036. So that's, well, we've got quite a long time to wait, haven't we? But it's worth putting in your thinking caps and remembering when that comes about. Now, the next really, really important conjunction, or the beginning of a new cycle we're going to be looking at, is the Saturn-Neptune cycle. In other words, Saturn and Neptune occupying the same degree of the zodiac. Now, that'll be there loosely in the middle of 2025, but it probably comes firmly into being in the February of 2036. Did I just say 1935? I meant 2025. So it's really coming into being in the February of 2026. So this conjunction is a very, very interesting one. If we break it up in terms, again, about what we know about these planets, we're looking at visions, dreams, ideals, which is represented by Neptune, and Saturn being the reality, being the constructive part of that. So often at the start of a Saturn-Neptune cycle, we get some kind of great clarification about that. So it shows us whatever dreams and visions and hopes and ideals we had, no longer workable. With Saturn coming to conjoin Neptune, we're shown these are unworkable now. They're not going to work. But there is also that possibility with Saturn and Neptune that Saturn will crystallize those Neptunian possibilities and visions. I've looked at this in the past very much in connection with the royal family, the British royal family, and it seems that a lot of key events linked to the royal family occur on the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, the Saturn-Neptune square, and the Saturn-Neptune opposition. So that's something to bear in mind as we come into 2025 and 2026. We're going to see some extremely important events that will affect the future of the monarchy. But of course, Saturn and Neptune are going to have an effect on our own lives. And this conjunction takes place in the sign of Aries. And I'm going to be talking about that as we look at this sign by sign in a moment. just to give you a little more insight on the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, which is ahead of us. And actually, I've talked about that in the sense of civil war. And those of you who read my Friday Bites will know I've looked at that very much in the case of the USA. It's not just going to be the only civil war, there'll be others. But that is really the clash of ideals, isn't it? The ideals and the divisions within society, wanting things to be right, wanting new rules, wanting new laws, very much implicit really in that Saturn-Neptune combination. So let's look at this back in 1989. That was a Saturn-Neptune conjunction in 1989. This presided over the fall of the Berlin Wall. And of course, everything that meant, that was the dissolving, good old dissolution, Neptune, of boundaries, this dissolved boundaries between East and West. And it was the moment where there was this great elation, really, that, East and West would no longer be divided. And the Berlin Wall coming down was an absolute graphic manifestation of Saturn crumbling against the weight of all that Neptunian idealism. And of course, we're going to be beginning a new Saturn-Neptune cycle. So it's going to be interesting to see whether in 2025, 2026, we find a similar situation, East and West. We'll have to wait and see, but we're primed for events of that nature coming up in 2025, 2026, which is not very far away. So we might also think about the Saturn opposition Neptune, and that occurred in 2006, 2007. And what that characterized was a whole lot of bubbles bursting, right? We know all those bubbles, housing bubble in particular, which of course precipitated the Great Recession and all the collapses of the banks, the banking institutions. That was Saturn opposition Neptune. When we got to the Saturn square, 2016, of course, this was the rise of Donald Trump, the arrival of Donald Trump in the entry of Donald Trump into the White House, and what has happened since then. I'm not going to make any personal comments about it, but we know what's going on. And also 2016 was Brexit, when England, United Kingdom, decided to remove itself from Europe. And I'm not going to make any comments about that either, but you can see, again, this principle of Saturn-Neptune. We see the dissolution or the dreams and the ideals that we have being brought to Saturnian reality, whether that means we make them concrete and deliver on them, or whether they crumble, all those ideals and philosophies and dreams. And so we're left with rubble. We're left with absolutely nothing. We do have a really important planetary conjunction coming up a little bit sooner than 2025. We have the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, and that will be taking place in April of next year, April 2024. Now, this is a really, really interesting combination. I have to say that I love this combination. When we think about Uranus, revolution, change, technology, and we think about Jupiter, planet of increase, planet of growth, we can absolutely expect major scientific breakthroughs. It's going to be extraordinary what we get with that. But of course, each time Jupiter and Uranus come to their conjunction, they're always in a different sign. So here we have Jupiter and Uranus in the sign of Taurus. And we think about Taurus, what is this sign? This is a sign of the earth, isn't it? It's a very fertile soil, earth type of sign. So we think about growth in terms of the earth itself. We're thinking about all sorts of things to do with changes in the earth. So we can also think about the effects of climate on the earth. And we've already seen in 2023 the huge devastation of fires that swept a large part of the globe. And I hate to say this, but I think this Jupiter-Uranus conjunction is going to do a lot more of that. But at the same time, we will have these breakthroughs in technology, which may make a difference as to how we cope with these kind of nature phenomenon, the things that we are having to deal with now as we move into the, Pluto in Aquarius time, this new age of Aquarius. And we also look, I think, with Jupiter and Uranus and the sign of Taurus. Taurus, such a sign linked to finance, that there's potentially a lot of upsets in the financial world. We have to wait and see, because I think astrologers, including myself, have expected a lot more drama during this time of Uranus in Taurus. I'm not saying we haven't had drama. Yes, we have. But perhaps we haven't seen giant economic crashes, as I think a lot of us really feared. But we need to keep our eyes open for this Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in the April of next year, because that may well be a point at which things get very much out of control financially. The arts, here's another thing. I love that Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in the sense of artistic development. Even we might think about artificial intelligence, but the use of this in a way that's open to us en masse. And also the idea of all the devices that we've become so familiar with, whether it's our smartphones or whatever else it is, we can see enormous strides in that. Transformation, really, in terms of technology, is what we're looking at with that Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. And last but not least, we come to eclipses. Eclipses are such a powerful portent of global events of importance. Already, this year, when we think about 2023, oh gosh, take a pick, but we certainly think about the monarchy in Great Britain. We saw the coronation of King Charles III, and of course that was on an eclipse. It was on a lunar eclipse. And of course, a lot of things that we're going to be seeing as we come to the end of this year, in October of 2023, for instance, there are going to be other things that are going to be hugely connected. Well, I talked about the monarchy, so we talk about the monarchy again, but also in other areas of life. Eclipses are always kind of turning points. Things kind of pivot on their axis at the time of eclipses. I've done a whole video on eclipses, or rather the nodal axis. So if you haven't yet caught that, do go back and look at the nodal axis, because that shifted this year into Aries. So we've got all the eclipses happening on the Aries, Libra kind of axis. And I've gone into quite some detail with that on that separate video. So I'm not going to do it again. But certainly the eclipses this year to come, which are October the 14th, October the 28th, October the 14th, that's a solar eclipse, new moon eclipsed in Libra, and the lunar eclipse, sun in Scorpio, moon in Taurus, of the 28th of October. Very important. When we come to next year, we're looking at March the 5th, which is a lunar eclipse, and then we're going to be looking at the 8th of April, which is a solar eclipse, largely on that Libra Aries axis, as I said earlier, but it will slip back into Pisces because the nodal axis moves backwards. Yes, no, we don't want to get down rabbit holes, do we? I'm not going down that rabbit hole. Suffice to say, eclipses are game changers, and they have been game changers ever since the earliest astronomers back in before BC were looking at the significance of eclipses in terms of major events, nation to nation, and it's still very much the same. So now we come to the second part of this video, which is looking at each sign and where the prime movers are. What are the big transits we're looking at, and what do these sort of mean in terms of your sun sign? It can also be your ascending sign, but there's a warning here. You really need to know the degree you have rising of that sign, because obviously that then denotes which house these various planets are in. So it's not just, naught of Aries rising. If you've got Aries rising, you need to know it's 25 of Aries or whatever else it may be, and then figure out where these planets are occurring. But they'll work just as well if you only know your sun sign you only know you're an Aries, for instance, because let's look at, remember that diagram of the solar system? You could see the sun at the center of our solar system and all the planets moving around it. And so that the sun as the central force, if you like, of everything is an important perspective. And we can indeed look out from the sun in our sign at the way these different planets are presenting themselves, what angles they're forming, where they are in that 12th house circle of the horoscope, and glean an awful lot in terms of sun sign. But yes, hopefully I cleared away any confusion in your mind. If you know your rising sign, you know the degree, then definitely take the interpretation I'm giving you from Aries, Taurus, whatever it is, if it's your rising sign. Otherwise, stick to the idea of your sun sign. So let's begin, and we're going to begin with Capricorn. And I'm going to show you how this looks from the perspective of being Capricorn rising or the sun in Capricorn. So in many ways, the way the planets are at the moment, and remember, we're looking at these 5 really important planets, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. How are they affecting you? Because these are the things that are either driving your success or blocking your success and happiness. So when we look at Capricorn, we can see that Pluto is just at the very, very end of the sign, which means that if you have a birthday around about the 17th, 18th of January, then Pluto is very much on your case. And even when it slips into Aquarius, it's going to still have an effect because Pluto moves so slowly. Its effect upon you is equally slow. So we're looking at a 2 to 4 year period as to when Pluto is effective. And that period really began last year in 2022, if you're at the end of your sign, Capricorn. And it'll go on really until 2025, really. I know it's a long time, but it's only going to be alive, if you like, producing events, putting the pressure on you. When we've got these other transits, the sun affecting it, Mercury, Mars, all those kind of things, a stationary position. So keeping your eye on the weekly movements of where the sun and Pluto are having a relationship with each other, Mars and Pluto, these are going to be trigger points when things happen for you. And what are we working with Pluto? Well, remember, I talked about this in the first part of my video. We're sort of looking at the idea that Pluto brings the unconscious into the conscious. So it means situations that we've been ignoring, things we haven't known about, come up. And it's always a challenge. This is never easy. And I think sometimes about even things like fame. Even if we become famous, the upset that causes to our personal lives and our personal relationships can be huge. So Pluto comes with a price. Even if the events that accompany it are celebratory, they're still going to provide a challenge. So generally speaking, and especially if you know you've got Pluto angling something in your chart, this idea of making what's unconscious conscious, of things being revealed, is a pattern while Pluto is in this position in your chart. Now, of course, we're very interested in anything to do with Saturn for Capricorn because it's your ruling planet. And if we look here, we can see that at the moment Saturn is in the early stages of the 3rd house. It's got another couple of years to go before it's finished. Neptune is in the 3rd house, right at the very, very end. These two have not yet joined hand in hand. They're very separate, and they're giving mixed messages. Neptune, of course, is influencing your thinking. It's looking at things to do with your visions of the future and your ideals of how life should be and what you want and think about life. So with Neptune, we want to believe in our dreams. We want to activate our dreams. Now, here's where Saturn could be a help or a hindrance, because Saturn has now entered the 3rd house. It's going to be there way through next year and the year after it. So we're looking here at the crystallization of one's ideas. So it's making solid things that we've thought about, and it's giving form to our ideals. But you know what else it's doing? This Saturn-Neptune combination, it's undermining us because of fear. And of course, when Saturn and Neptune come together, as they will do in the middle of 2025 and go on, then the idea that irrational fears, irrational kind of sense of the impermanence of things can really impact on the things that will provide structure and stability in your life. And of course, the Saturn-Neptune conjunction will be happening in your 4th house. So it was going to have its first effect on things to do with your family, things to do with the roots of life, and things to do with the home that you actually live in. So that's where we're going to see the first instances of idealism versus reality, but also that sense of fears versus, the ability to construct, find security, and move forward. Jupiter and Uranus for you are in a terrific place. They're in the 5th house here, as you can see. So they're urging you to be creative with your solutions to problems every bit as much as being creative per se, whether that means bringing new things into being, whether we're even talking about babies coming into being. So this is a wonderful place to have Jupiter and Uranus. And during this time, right through until the April of next year, you should think consciously about what it is you want to create in your life that gives pleasure, joy, fulfillment, and satisfaction. And maybe it is a combination of making your world a little bit bigger, whether by travel or whether by the devices. Remember, Uranus is all about devices, or whether we think about the use of technology in terms of making your world bigger. The eclipses of the year, the one coming up on the 14th of October, is right at the top of your chart. So we're looking here at new opportunities regarding your place in the world. This can have something to do with home as well, so new property, but more it's going to be in concerned with your job and your place in the world, how people look at you in terms of your role. The second one, of course, falling on that 5th, 11th axis, has a lot to do with the fulfillment of a creative venture. This is just, really in brief. So I want to now move on to Aquarius. And so if we think about Aquarius, well, Pluto, of course, entered your sign in the March of 2023, and then it popped out again in June, and it's going to come back again in January next year, and it's going to pop back out of it again later on in 2024 before it comes back again in 2025. This is why we give Pluto a really big kind of margin of 4 years in which to really experience this. But initially, it's those of you who were born at the very beginning of your sign. So we're talking about the early Aquarians, January the 19th, 20th, 21st. You're under Pluto, which means everything that I said about Pluto, things which are unconscious being made conscious. I also talked about Pluto in the sense of reformation, reforming the land. So a lot of your life will be reformed, but certainly things to do with your personal life, you personally, how things are going to change who you are, how you behave, what you personally want to achieve in life and what you want to see in your life. Pluto is busy presenting situations over the course of the years to come, which give you some grit against which to struggle in order to bring into being this new kind of skin of yours. Remember, we shed a skin with Pluto, but what do we do when that skin is shed? It exposes a nice, shiny new one. So we really want to be thinking of that process of transformation as a very slow process, where in the space of 3 to 4 years, you will be very different and your life will be very different. For you, Saturn and Neptune are in that 2nd house. So we're looking at things to do with your value system, things to do with your self-worth. So this is about how you feel about yourself and how you feel others treat you, how they value you and your offerings, every bit as much as it is to do with what money you have in the bank and what assets you have. So Neptune, on the one hand, which has been here for several years, may have eroded sources of income. You've seen income go. You may have seen things that you thought of as your assets being dissolved. They went, they're not there now. But what it's also doing, of course, is giving you new kind of values and a new sort of set of principles and even a new financial structure, the way to look at money. I mean, our attitudes to money are so important. If we fear losing money, then money is going to be a problem for us. Whereas if we see money as a commodity and we don't have a lot of emotional fear attached to it, it works much better for us. And here I think Saturn is a help. While initially Saturn may give you hard times with finances, what it's going to do is restructure your finances and give you a new solid base. And when that combines with Neptune, as it will start to do increasingly in 2025 through to 2026, you can see perhaps the complete, the kind of visualization, what you visualized coming to pass, or some of the things you thought about and thought would be there, you're going to see that not happen. Remember that whole image of rubble to, the Berlin Wall coming down? Of course, it came down for a good purpose, but, a lot of people didn't like the idea of a wall being reduced to rubble. And that can happen with a Saturn-Neptune conjunction. Of course, that's going to have much more bearing on your mindset and the way you start to think about your world, the way you express yourself, the relations that you have with the world. This is going to make for many, many changes. Idealism should be strong, but so too should the idea of reality. Jupiter and Uranus also in an interesting place for you at the moment. And we've got that Jupiter-Uranus conjunction coming up on April the 21st next year. So this could really be some extremely fortunate times, especially in regard to home and family and the foundations of life. It doesn't always manifest in the way you think it will. It isn't always going to be you get a great big home and everything is perfect and you win the lottery and everything is fine. Well, you may. It depends really how you look at what you're aiming for with this combination. If you want freedom, if you want the freedom to be yourself, the freedom to live in a way that reflects who you are, that Jupiter-Uranus conjunction is helping you achieve that, even if some of the events it's producing seem to be in the direct opposite. But yes, put a ring around that April period when great changes, good changes can come about. For you, we're also looking at the eclipses, largely on that third ninth axis, so it may have a lot to do with people overseas or travel, things to do with the wider world and the connections that you have with the wider world. We then look at the lunar eclipse on the 28th of October, and we see that on the life direction axis of your horoscope. So here we're looking at the fulfillment of a cycle, the completion of a cycle, the end of a chapter. So this might be the completion of a project, the completion of a contract, or it may also be the end of a particular time and a particular place. Not necessarily an unhappy ending, can also be a happy ending, but what happens thereafter is going to be very different. And so to Pisces. Well, as you can see, Pisces, Saturn at the beginning of your sign, Neptune at the end of your sign. So this is quite a kind of powerful year for you, 2023, 2024, 2025. Clearly, there's going to be times when you're not feeling the pressure of Saturn or the kind of directionlessness and inspiration of Neptune. There are periods when it's not that strong. But nevertheless, when we look at this period as a whole, one of the most formative periods of your life, regardless of your age. But of course, if you're 29 or you've got Saturn in Pisces, you're 58 or even 87, Then, of course, this Saturn returning to its original position in your chart and having Neptune in the sign as well is really making quite an impact on your life. And again, I've done a whole video on Saturn in Pisces, and if you haven't caught that yet, please do. So what we find, we think about Pisces as a whole, who you are as a whole. You are that visionary person. You are compassionate. You do see things, nuances in things, and you're reaching out for something that's more important than mundane values. That's your very nature. And sometimes, of course, that can turn into being a bit of an escapist, somebody who doesn't always, look at the reality of what's involved in some of these great schemes and ideas. So what Saturn is doing, as Saturn comes into, the early stages of Pisces, is it's building or bringing structure with it. And I think a lot of you Pisces, as we go through this year, next year, and even into 2025, 26 even, you're going to see that there is more structure in your life. And a lot of the hopes that you have at the moment, the visions that you're moving towards, you will be able to bring them into reality. But every time you stumble, every time something doesn't work out and you don't get the backing, that something else has gone wrong, don't treat that as a sign that nothing can ever be. You just need to treat it as a sign to go back to the drawing board, to build. Don't be discouraged. Saturn and Neptune in the sign of Pisces affects Pisces rising or the Sun Pisces, can make you from time to time feel enormously discouraged and like giving up. But of course, this is what it's all about. It's all about persisting. It's all about finding it within you to keep going forward and trying it this way, trying it that way. Jupiter and Uranus are in the third house. So this is affecting your mindset. And I do think that Jupiter in the third house can often give rise to optimism. So it's a good counterbalance to Saturn and Neptune in your sign. It's like, hey, guess what? This didn't work, but maybe this will. And guess what? It isn't over till it's over. That's the kind of thing you get from Jupiter in your third house. And of course, this may make your desire to learn a lot. So you do courses or you do things that add to your bank of skills, add to your understanding of the world. And with Uranus there as well, there's great opportunities that come to you to do things differently, to learn new ways to do things, to experiment with technology, to experiment with artificial intelligence or any of those things. That's what Uranus is bringing into your mental world, so to speak, and making you curious and giving you opportunities to broaden your world, really. We're also looking at Pluto briefly. Pluto, of course, hovering on that 12th house cusp. And because it's there, it can be very unconscious. And with Pluto, we want to make what's unconscious conscious. But I think unless and until it starts to connect with something in your natal chart, there's a lot of underground seeding going on. And I think this has a lot to do with the reformation of your spiritual code, whatever you subscribe to, which is rather interesting. It's going to take a while. So we're going to, not say we're going to ignore Pluto, but the real focus is on Saturn, Neptune, and Jupiter and Uranus. These are the more dramatic and dynamic planetary positions that we're looking at the moment. We come to Aries. Well, Aries, Saturn and Neptune are knocking at your door. And I think if you're a March Aries, so that you're born 20th, 21st, 22nd of March, you're already getting the effect, particularly of Neptune. Saturn has not yet joined in, but we're getting Neptune. So what happens with Neptune at the moment is that you can feel it. I talk about knocking at the door. You're getting intimations. Your dream life is going to be extremely interesting because your dreams are showing you, in a way, things that you're not really picking up in reality. So they can be beautiful golden dreams and they can be a bit nightmarish. But the point is to pay attention to them and see what relevance they have to do with your current life. Remember, we're always preparing for something. And the reason I do this is to prepare the ground for you. So with Neptune coming into Aries, this is a point at which, dreams come true, or they're proved to be built on the sand. They have no structure. But now is the time to think about that. Now is the time to think about all sorts of things to do with your future. Checking your health. Well, Saturn and Neptune are in the 12th house. There are all sorts of things related to your health and fitness that need constant addressing. Small signals of this ache, this pain, this thing that isn't quite right. Check it out, deal with it. Dental things as well. I'm always saying the 12th house isn't just about physical health and spiritual health. It's also about dental health, but it is also about spiritual health. So as we look at Saturn coming through this 12th house, it's almost as if a cycle is almost finished, because that's going to come into your sign in 2025, 2026. It's going to be there. So you want to be preparing for this new build-up of Saturn, which means looking at many of the things that have been the sort of grounding principles of your life, and to see what is no longer worthwhile and what new pillars you need to put into your life to support the life that you're moving into. And of course, this can have an application to your health as well, but also your spiritual health. Maybe some of you are already experiencing some doubts about your spiritual framework. Are you thinking it's not shaping up? It's not doing what it's supposed to do? New structures need to be formed. It doesn't mean you need to throw all your spiritual beliefs out of the window, but it may mean they need adjusting, and new, stronger structures need to be in place. Let's talk about Pluto up there in your 10th house. Really, it's those of you born towards the end of the sign of Aries. So we're looking at the 17th, 18th, 19th, even the 20th of April. That's where Pluto is focusing its transformational properties. So we could see that there's a lot of change going on in your career, in the position you hold in the world and how people look at you. This must be transformed. This must be changed. And the events that are happening in your life are all about moving you from one space to another. So this might have an application in terms of very different jobs and career choices you may be making, to also things to do with where you live, the country you live in. So Pluto can be changing or reforming the land upon which you stand. But it's also how you look to other people. So Pluto is either transforming this in a way that people are looking at you with a new pair of eyes, but it's all to do with the challenging situations that come your way. And if you can actively think about, or consciously think about, shedding a skin and allowing a new one to come through, it's a very healthy way of looking at the changes that come into your life that you feel are quite challenging at the time. They're building a new you. They're revealing a new you. And it's a more essential you, a more truthful you. Let's look at Jupiter and Uranus in the second house. Well, Uranus has been there since 2018, if I remember rightly. So there've been a lot of changes in income, a lot of changes in how you make money, how you live, how you use money, what money means to you. That's ongoing. Jupiter, of course, should have increased your income as it went into Taurus in May, and you should be in that process now, either of seeing more money coming to you, or you are actively seeking ways in which to grow your money. Maybe that means entrepreneurial businesses or doing things, taking extra jobs. But it's also about the value you place on yourself. And if your self-value is intact, Aries, you're going to go from strength to strength. And let's see what that Jupiter-Uranus situation, which we'll do in April of 2021, is this a real fortunate, lucky by chance kind of situation regarding your money, an increase, or is it the opposite, an unexpected expenditure or something else that sort of changes the map, which initially phases you? But lots of things about this time are all about thinking of the future, Aries. That's what you're about, thinking carefully of your future. Taurus, well, let's start with how wonderful it is to have Jupiter in your sign. Now, you may be listening to me and saying, no, it isn't. It's just awful. I'm having a terrible time. But Jupiter, remember we looked at that when we were looking at the Jupiter cycle at the beginning of this video. We looked at the idea of Jupiter at this point seeding things, beginning things. The opportunities that are arising for you are to be seized because they will be opportunities that will grow if handled correctly. And here's Uranus in your sign, particularly affecting the sort of mid-May birthdays. So that on the one hand, Uranus is changing everything up and uprooting you and doing things differently and forcing you to think, how unstable is my life when I want everything to be stable? But you know, the only way to go forward when you've got Uranus in your sign is to go with the new, is to go what's offered to you, not to consider holding back or to go with the old route or the old strategy. Uranus is saying, come on, wake up. It's a new age. You have to incorporate new things. You must change. It's good. All change is good, and it's particularly good in the sense of you as a person. And the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction of next year is opportunity in a bottle. And you may even like to consider doing something around that April 21st time, which would really make an observable difference to your life. You know, not every one of us can be famous. Not every one of us is going to set the world on fire. But you do have the opportunities with Jupiter and Uranus here to set the world on fire, set your little world on fire. If we look at Pluto, which of course is edging around the 0 degrees of Aquarius, forging a 90-degree aspect to your Taurian sun, well, of course, that depends whether you're born as an early Taurus, 20th, 21st, 22nd of April, or whether you're at the end of a sign. But if you've got planets in very early Taurus, 0 to about 3 degrees, then Pluto is very much activating your chart, and it's doing its thing, making unconscious conscious, so that lots of things you're having to confront. Is that what's been going on? Yes, it is what's been going on. Now, what are you going to do about it? Is it also saying to you, you have untold talents, you have untold gifts, and it's time you use them. It's time for change, and we get that both in terms of Jupiter and Uranus in Taurus, and we get it in terms of Pluto in Aquarius, end of Capricorn, particularly affecting you as I've just described. And also, you see, we saw earlier in the year, that April period, April the 20th of 2023, the solar eclipse squaring Pluto, that probably changed things up quite a bit for you. And then we move forward and we think about the lunar eclipse that followed on the 5th of May. And here again, something resolved, the end of a cycle. And we've got this mirrored again as we come into the end of October with another lunar eclipse the other way around. Instead of the sun in your sign and the moon in Taurus, we've got the sun in Taurus and the moon in your sign. So the 28th is going to be a really, really pivotal time for a lot of Taurians. You'll see the culmination of a lot of cycles, may have a lot to do with a relationship. Going forward, Saturn and Neptune not yet really making a big impact unless they're connecting to something in your sign. And you know what? I'm not going to waste a lot of time thinking about those two, because in a general pattern of life, the big movers are Jupiter, Uranus, and Pluto for you. And I think we've really dealt with that. And those are the things we need to concentrate on. And obviously, my year ahead, which I write every year, you're going to find a little bit more detail on all planets, but you know, these are the ones that you need to focus on, the ones I've just covered. So Gemini, here you go. We have Saturn and Neptune are preeminence. Why are they preeminent in terms of what's happening to you, what's happening in your future? Is that they're directly overhead. They're occupying that 10th house position, whether you are a Sun Gemini or whether you've got very early degrees of Gemini rising. Saturn and Neptune, preeminent position in one of those active, doing, becoming areas of the horoscope. Now, if we look at Neptune, Neptune's been there for a few years, and it's only going to be active when it comes and looks at something that you have in your natal chart. But then what happens typically is that you lose your way. You sort of lose your sense of, you know, where your boundaries are. You sort of feel destabilized. You feel that nothing is kind of real. Yes, your dreams may be very real to you, and following your dreams, very important. But at the same time, there's this sense of things being a bit insubstantial, things slipping between your fingers. And particularly for many Geminis, it's to do with your career, so that you feel you've lost your foothold on the career ladder, even though it's so important for you to bring these dreams and ambitions of yours into reality. But here's where Saturn is proving and will prove useful. Saturn is bringing structure. In the wake of dissolution, the dissolution of your dreams, the dissolution of things that you feel were the pillars of your existence, Saturn comes along and constructs them. So that in a funny kind of way, you need to look at the things that have drizzled out of being, whether they're relationships, whether they're ambitions, you know, whatever they've been, they've drizzled away. You need to think of Saturn coming in the wake to rebuild them. Now, Saturn on its own is also saying sometimes in life, you don't get loved. Sometimes in life, not everybody loves you. Not everybody offers you things on a plate. You have to earn them. You have to struggle for them. So in a way, building your future is very important, but it's built on struggle. And that's why you're having struggle. But look at it as healthy. Look at it as something that you can use to make you stronger and to make your position stronger, to make your world what you want it to be. If we come to Jupiter and Uranus, the reason I'm looking at these two is at the moment they're in the 12th house. So a lot of things are happening sort of out of your control. Things that you don't think of as being important are going to turn out to be important. It's that person you met. It's that opportunity that suddenly presented itself and you thought, nah, I'm not going to do that. Well, what happens when Jupiter comes into your sign, which it will do in the May of 2024, is that some of those opportunities you turned down or you didn't recognize as opportunities are going to start to come back in. And I think if you get a second chance at something, Gemini, next year, the year after, 2025, take it. That's so important. There's a reason it's come back a second time or even a third time. And it needs to be embraced. And of course, remember my picture of Jupiter and how, you know, it's different stations in its 12-year cycle, how to look at Jupiter squaring Jupiter and opposing Jupiter. You know, what you set in motion in 2024, 2025, you're going to be looking at 3 years later, 28, 29, you know, maths isn't my strong subject, but 3 years later, then you'll be able to see whether the seeds you planted, the things that you, the second chances that you have, you'll be able to see just how, you know, how they've worked out. The eclipse is for you, 5th house. This is interesting. That eclipse coming up on the 14th of October may produce a new project, something new coming into being. Could even be news of a new baby or something that you think of as creative or procreative. And certainly around that time, opportunities arising. And remember, this has been a bit of a theme, hasn't it, in the last sort of 3 or 4 minutes? Take it. You know, when an eclipse comes into your life and connects with you and produces an opportunity, it's part of your destiny. Let's look at it that way. If we look now at Cancer, and Cancer, when I think about where the important patterns are for you, we are still looking at that 7th house of yours. Pluto is in your opposite sign at the moment. Yes, it's going to slip into Aquarius. It's going to move into your 8th house. But you know, the 7th and 8th houses have a lot in common because they are to do with other people, your relationships with other people. In the 7th house, and where Pluto has been trundling these past, 13 years or whatever it's been, has been to challenge you in your relationships and to build great relationships despite the challenges that have come into your life, and to see what it's like to either be under the power and control of someone, or how to make adjustments to the circumstances that have come into your life to make a relationship stronger and better. How other people have impacted you, your future, you as a being. That's what Pluto has been doing, and it's still doing it, especially if you're born towards the end of your sign, which means somewhere like the 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th of July, the later degrees of Cancer. Now in the 8th house, and again, I've done a long kind of video on Pluto in your 8th house, but it's worth thinking about again, because this is all about what you get from relationships. So we're still in this process of finding your feet and finding your individuality, finding your own independence, your ability to be an independent individual, yet at the same time being able to receive from others and to have your independence in light of the relationships that you form, still forming decent relationships. That's this pattern. And it will show up in your financial relationships with banks and all those financial institutions, every bit as much as it will with your relationships. So very, very strong continuing influence on relationships. Saturn and Neptune right now in the 9th house. Neptune coming to the very end. So it's going to start making an impact in things to do with your position in the world, your reputation, your job, how people look at you and your role in life. So already it's beginning to change. You're already probably thinking about, is this really what I want from my life? Is this how I want people to look at me? Is this really what it's all about? And I think here it's about building or moving towards a different view of life. And this may mean anything from saying, I don't want to live in this country. I want to live in a different country. I want to have a different religion. I want to have a whole different framework for my life. That's Neptune talking. That's Neptune busy getting you to look at structures in life that provide a new life framework for you. By the time, Saturn and Neptune conjoin at the very early degrees of Aries, which of course will have more of an effect in 2025, 2026, if you're a June-born Cancerian. This is all about ideals versus reality, isn't it? And what's happening at the moment is Saturn coming through the 9th house is saying, okay, you've got this yearning to live in a different country. You've got this yearning to do something which is going to require training, which is going to require a lot of restructuring of your life. This is all important if you're to do that. If you're to be ready for that Neptune-Saturn conjunction in 2025, 2026, and the impact it's going to have on your future right now, this is all about learning. This is all about developing structures that now fit a new worldview, if you like, and a new view of how your life should be in this new world. If we come to Leo now, Leo, you've got so many things happening to you. You've got Pluto dodging around that sort of early degrees of Aquarius. So it's in your opposite sign, the opposite house, relationships we're looking at. Even though it may have moved back into Capricorn as I speak, it's going to come back into Aquarius, your opposite sign, on January the 24th, I think it is, next year, 2024. Then it's going to come back again and it's going to go forward again. So there's this dance going on with Pluto at the opposite point of the zodiac to Leo. Now, certainly, if you're an early Leo, which means you have a birthday around the 22nd, 23rd, 24th of July, or planets and points in very early Leo, you're going to be much more sensitive to Pluto's work, if you like, or the presence of this planet in your life. And what is Pluto doing? Bringing the unconscious into consciousness, bringing what's buried into the light. So a lot of things that are part of this transitional period of your life, where you're moving from one stage of your life to another, have a lot to do with what has gone on underground, what you've not seen, what you don't know about, coming into reality. And therefore you're having to face things that you didn't expect, you didn't know, and they're going to be challenging. As I said in one of my other interpretations, this idea that Pluto always comes with events that we don't like is not true. Pluto can come in the guise of wonderful events, in the sense that we might find fame, we might find great success, we might have a baby. I mean, all these things are absolutely amazing things in our life that are transformational. They change us. But guess what? Once these things have happened, there are all sorts of things that are a struggle. It's a struggle to have a life that you can fit in comfortably if you've suddenly become famous. You've got a baby. Well, hey, what's happened to your freedom? So even the good things that are forging plutonic transformation require considerable core change. And that's what you're being asked to do. And for a lot of Leos, this is being reflected in your love life, in the business relationships you have, in that there are power struggles and all sorts of things that are happening. But remember, there's lots of things about this that are going to give rise to a new way of working, a new way of being in a relationship, new people in your life. They just have to be gone through. You have to go through these portals to get to the other side of it. And all the time, it's about core change. Let's look at Jupiter and Uranus up there in the 10th house. What are they offering you? My goodness, we've talked about fame. We've talked about recognition. We've talked about immense change, sudden change. So for some Leos, as we move forward, as we come to that beautiful Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in April of next year, are we looking at a sudden and unexpected promotion, something that's going to pivot you up into a whole new echelon of your work or your life situation? Could be. Or is it that the change in your career circumstances, maybe the end of a job, that kind of thing, you would think initially, hey, guess what? That's not good. What am I going to do now? Well, that's exactly the question. What are you going to do now? So that Jupiter-Uranus conjunction is about finding new, innovative ways of being in the world. That's what it's about. So there's great opportunities there. I just want to mention briefly, Saturn and Neptune in the 8th house. This may be giving you some troubles financially, and we will go on to do that. And I think as Saturn moves towards conjunction with Neptune, the fear of losing money, the fear of what money means is a real obstacle to your being successful and being secure. So keep thinking that every time you worry about money, think about what that worry is doing. Is it helping? Probably not. What you need to do is revision your financial views, change them, allow Neptune to bring you a new financial vision, and allow Saturn to put the structure to it. In a funny kind of way, there's no such thing as loss, because out of loss comes opportunity. Eclipses, well, these eclipses this year, they're predominantly, I think, for the rest of the year, divide between things to do with your mindset, to do with things that really build your strategies, and so that plans change. So around October the 14th, think what's happening at that time. That means, you know what, I'd have to throw that plan out, redo another one. And maybe there's a new way I need to look at what's going on in my life. Then we come to the lunar eclipse of the 28th of October. Now that's going to be on the 4th, 10th axis. So we're in the whole area of home and family versus career and your place in the world. So something's ending here. This is a cycle that's ending. And I think, having talked about what Jupiter-Uranus represents and also the fear of loss, these things will help you deal with the events around the time of the eclipses in October. So Virgo, I think you can see from the picture here that I've got of the signs and where things are, Virgo, you know, being on that 9 o'clock position, we can see right at the opposite point, we've got Saturn and Neptune. Now, Neptune has been moving through there for many years. And so it's only when it's made a connection to your sun in Virgo or other planets you may have in Virgo or other planets in your chart and points that you've got the effect of Neptune. And Neptune can make us very, very idealistic, as I talked about earlier. We talked about visions, we talk about dreams, and it's important to have dreams, it's important to have visions. But how often with Neptune, we feel as though we've lost our vision. We feel as though circumstances have got in the way of our dreams. That's the effect of Neptune sometimes. We have very high hopes. We have very high elevated feelings. We're much more sensitive when we have Neptune coming into our lives or into our charts. And that means that we're much more vulnerable to hurt, betrayal, loss, all those other things, which is why I'm sure a lot of you can relate to this idea that Neptune has brought losses. It's brought a sense of betrayal, whether you feel life has betrayed you, not necessarily a person, but just generally you feel as though a lot of things that you'd hoped for haven't happened. That's a sense of betrayal. But I talked about the idea of Saturn and Neptune. You get the construction of your dreams. You get things made real. And Saturn, in its current position, which is just starting out in Pisces, it's going to conjoin with Neptune as we get to 2025, 2026. So we see that Saturn is already working on getting you to be realistic about things without being cynical. You know, there is such a difference between saying this is the reality of what I'm dealing with, as opposed to saying things like that will never work, that's useless. You know, that you don't need to do. What you need to do is say, is this real? Can this be made real? How do I make this real? So periodically through this next couple of years, you'll have opportunities that allow you to meet people or to be exposed to people, to be exposed to teachings, if you like, that give you the opportunity to make your dreams real. And because this is the opposite sign, and when we look at it in a solar chart, we look at relationships, a lot of the things that are in your life and the instruments of your making real your dreams is to do with your relationships. It's to do with other people's impact on your life. So you run the gamut between people who are inspirational, people you fall in love with, or that you want to, you admire highly, they're on a pedestal, to the situations where the people you have admired and loved fall off their pedestals, and the fact that the relationships you have such high hopes for, that you want to last a lifetime, that you want to build your security and stability in, no, that's not going to happen. And it's hard, but what you have to do with this situation, and why this is a bit of a dance, is that because someone has let you down, because a relationship has let you down, whether we're talking about business or whether we're talking about romance or relationships, this mustn't be allowed to impact how you feel about yourself. You have to reboot the faith in yourself and rebuild your person, because it's in rebuilding you and rebuilding your dreams that they can come into reality, not resting on other people helping you fulfill your dreams. No, you fulfill your dreams. You go about it. You bring everything back to yourself. By the time Saturn and Neptune come together, then they're going to be on that 8th house cusp. So one of the things that it is good to be doing at the moment, because that's one of the financial houses, is to make sure you're looking at your future and you're thinking, if I'm going to live until I'm 90, how am I going to do that? Is my health up to it? Is my bank balance up to it? What have I done to safeguard my future? So these are really, really important things for you to be thinking of in these next 2 years, about safeguarding your future, and in a funny kind of way, not putting all your eggs in one basket and assuming things like an inheritance will come your way, or that your partner or that something else will provide the money for you. It's coming back always to yourself. And that is going to really, really help you make the most of the planets as they go through to become successful and strong and stable. And also we need to look at that Jupiter up there, because Jupiter is going to come into Gemini, the 10th house of your solar chart, in May of 2024. And when it does that, that's going to elevate you. There are going to be opportunities, especially career-wise. So everything that I'm saying, remember, this is great kaleidoscope of different planets in different areas of your chart, all working together like a big symphony. So every little piece that I've told you about is worth looking at in its own right. But then we look at the whole symphony and we can see that even through disappointment, letdown, betrayals, losses, there can be growth, success, and achievement. And so to Libra, well, my goodness, Libra, this is a really important 12 to 18, well, let's say a 12-month period, because we've already done quite a bit of it. And the reason being that the nodal axis is going Aries, Libra. So for the most part, you're getting either a lunar eclipse, meaning the moon is in your sign on an eclipse, or we're getting a solar eclipse, which is the way things are going in October of 2023. We've got a solar eclipse in your sign. So that is a new, brand new personal cycle beginning with Nobson. So maybe you already know why a big new chapter of life is taking place. And although we like to think of eclipses happening in when they do, and so that is the time period when you know all the events linked to a new chapter take place, it could be the portent of things to come before this next eclipse. So we're looking here at things to do with a new chapter opening up between now and the March of next year. This is also about getting off the fence, Libra. A lot of the reasons that people think of you as being indecisive is because when it comes to decision making, you are thinking about other people and you are thinking about how things are going to look. And that means that you can't make an instantaneous decision. But you know what? In the October period, I don't think you have any option other than to make a decision quickly. You won't have the luxury of time. Now, when I come to this second eclipse, which is on the 28th of October, we're looking at finances. So this period of October, which of course is your birthday month as well, has a lot to do with your values, the future, whether this is to do with your financial future or the things that you want to have in your life that say these represent my values. This is my self-worth in terms of the things that matter to me in my life, not always financially. So the second eclipse on the 28th is all about, to some degree, wrapping something up. It's the signing of a contract. It's the ripping up of a contract. It's the things that happen around that time that point back at you and say, what is your standing in the world? Who are you? What kind of substance are you made of? That's what the events are doing. And of course, that can be a crisis. In other words, you come through the other side saying, I've stood for who I am, and I haven't allowed whatever it's been, whatever situation, to really, change my views or change my opinion of myself. I've come through the other side of that. Eclipses are always a challenge in some way, even if great success is forecast by that eclipse. Success brings its own lot of problems. So now we come to the big Pluto changes. And if you're born towards the end of your sign, which means you're born around about the 18th, 19th, 20th, 21st of October, then Pluto is, over your sun and maybe over other planets as well. And Pluto, being this great transformer, is bringing from the unconscious into the conscious. That's a good way of looking at it, because sometimes it's almost like we see something we haven't seen before, hasn't necessarily changed. It's just we see it. So that a lot of the experiences that are happening to you at the moment are forging changes in your consciousness, so that you are looking, your perception is changing, and perception is all. How you look at a situation, how you look at your life, it's so important. That's the change that Pluto is forging, first and foremost. But we also see it attached to the fourth house here. It's moving into the fifth house. It's moving from Capricorn to Aquarius. So we're looking at things to do with the roots of life. What's being transformed here? Are members of the family, are things happening to members of the family which impact you? Are things changing there? Is the home itself changing? Are you planning a huge move? Are you going to move countries? These are all big Pluto fourth house kind of issues. And that's where this the planet is at the moment in terms of Libra rising. And when I look at it as a Libran. But as it moves into the fifth house, then what's going to come out of all this is great creative power. And it is to do with this perception of yourself. When your perception changes, everything changes. And it's this idea that when you have that, how powerful life can be, because the power of change, the power of your perception has changed. Saturn and Uranus, oh my goodness, yes, in the sixth house. How many Librans do I know have got health issues or dental issues or existential spiritual crises? That's very sixth house, and it's partly to do with Neptune going through that area and Saturn. So Neptune is sort of saying, I don't feel quite how I should feel. And that might manifest as all sorts of things health-wise. Maybe it's weird conditions that, you're not expecting to have. But of course, it can also be a sense of great well-being. Neptune, giving us a great sense of the possible. But Saturn coming along in its wake is saying, well, that's all very well. You've got these issues, but they need to be addressed. So any minor health issue needs to be addressed while you've got this combination in the sixth house. They need to be addressed in the next year to a year and a half, because once Saturn and Neptune come together in conjunction, they're going to do so right opposite your sign in Aries. And I'll cover that in a second. But the important thing is to look now at putting in the sort of not the foundation pieces, it's putting in systems, really. That sixth house is about systems. So you have to pay attention to your system with Saturn in the sixth house. And with Neptune, things can run away. And so Saturn needs to come along and say, hey, let this go too far. Now we need to put it in a solid block. The other thing really is relationships. And as we get nearer 2025, it will be very important for the rules of engagement to be firmly in your relationship life. And so if right now you're listening to me and thinking, well, my relationship could be a bit better, could be a business relationship, a business partnership, then this is the time to say, look, if it's not good now, it's not going to get better on its own, and steps need to be taken. Remember, we're looking at health, and we might be looking at the health of the partner, we might be looking at the health of the relationship. So now is the time to put in the structures, the systems that are going to support you in the future. We come now to Scorpio. Scorpio, wow, you know, a bit like all the fixed signs. That means Aquarius and Taurus and Leo. You've got Pluto on the one hand, which is a very powerful transformer. And you've got Jupiter and Uranus on the other, which is all about change and breakthroughs. Whenever we look at Uranus, we're talking about breakups, breakthroughs, breakdowns. Those three break words. So Uranus has been moving through the seventh house for you ever since 2018. So you're probably nodding your head at me right now and saying, oh, I've seen all three: breakdown, break up, and breakthrough. And with Jupiter in the same area, you've now got this principle, or these themes really, really brought fully into being. They're accentuated, they're accelerated, they're made more of. So this period that we're in right now, through to about May of next year, and we're looking particularly at Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in the April of next year, 2024, this is extraordinary things happening in relationships, whether we're talking about business relationships, whether we're talking about people backing you, or whether we're talking about romantic relationships, things like marriage. There are unusual, unprecedented developments happening. You wouldn't be able to make them up. They just happen. Whether you meet somebody and that somebody is like giving up your whole life to be with that person, to change your life because of this person's presence in your life. That can happen. So too can the idea of something unprecedented happening in your relationship, so that you have to change your relationship because of the external circumstances that have happened, whether that means a partner or you yourself have opportunities to move to a different country or a different place, or there have been events in your partner's life or your life that mean, hey, our relationship is now different. One of us is living here, the other person is living there. You know, we've now got this new status quo in our relationships, but it's adapt and grow. But of course, it can be mighty breakups as well. Again, let's widen this net, not just marriages and romantic relationships, but business relationships and relationships where people may represent you. Let's say you've got an agent representing you. So while there is a potential for new and good agencies to back you, there is just as much a potential for that arrangement to break up for unprecedented reasons. But you know, whatever Jupiter and Uranus are going to do, they're going to create opportunity. And you've got to think of it that way. Whatever blows up in your face, so to speak, that's going to create an opportunity. And just think of it that way. Pluto operating in a very similar way, especially if you have a birthday, as I've said, around about that 21st, 22nd, 23rd of October. So that Pluto is making, what's unconscious conscious, and at the same time transforming your possibilities. And a lot of them have to do with family, and I'm going to be talking about family at the end of this video. So this will definitely speak volumes to you about something to do with your family life and your home life. Pluto very much, in play here. Eclipses. the second eclipse of October, the 28th of October, Sun in Scorpio, Moon in Taurus. This is a mirror image of the one on May the 5th. This time, the Moon was in Scorpio, the Sun was in Taurus. So here you have a sandwich or bookends. You have something happening that's in relation to that. A cycle is complete here always on a lunar eclipse. But I also think that what we might be looking at is, well, I've talked about relationships, I've talked about sudden developments, unprecedented developments, and I think that this full moon eclipse plays into that. And let's leave it like that. Let's leave it open. Let's not be too specific about this. But events around the late October time are going to play into some even bigger changes that are going to happen in the spring, or, well, of course, it could be winter if you're in Australia, but let's say the March, April, May of 2024. Finally, we come to Sagittarius. Well, my goodness, Sagittarius. We're looking at a lot of very, very interesting developments in your life. We've got Saturn and Neptune on the one hand, speaking volumes to you already. And we've got Jupiter and Uranus also speaking volumes. So let me take Saturn and Neptune first of all. Now, Neptune has been moving through the fourth house for you for many years. So there have only been occasions when it's perhaps connected with something in your natal chart that you've noticed the kind of strange effect that Neptune has in our lives. It makes things seem very slippy slidey. We're not sure of what values we've got. We're not sure of what's right. We're not sure what's real. We're not sure of a lot of things. The ground beneath us no longer feels very stable, and that means we wobble a lot. So if you're listening to me, Sagittarius, and you're nodding your head, then Neptune has you by the tail, as I often say. And this is where Saturn plays a really important part, because as much as Neptune erodes boundaries and makes you feel as though you haven't got substance beneath your feet, Saturn comes along and says, okay, you have to have substance. You have to do something about this. This now has to be built and strong, and things need to be faced. So that we're looking at a period of time now, right through to about 2025, where the things that happen in your life, especially if they are related to your family or to your home, they really need to be handled in a way that's real, and that you're not letting all sorts of airy-fairy nonsense, not real, all of that insubstantial stuff get in the way of what really matters. And if we're talking like this about family, we can see really that this is affecting your life as well. Why buy into everything that's maybes and mights? Let's get real. And the focus on making real and on what really counts is going to be your way through to success, happiness, and joy. Every time you think to yourself, I could do this, that could happen, that may be what's going on, come back and say, but is that real? What are the chances of that becoming real, being real right now? Or, what is all to do with, things that aren't real, conspiracies, fake stories, illusory kind of situations. It's got to be real. By the time Saturn and Neptune draw even closer together, 2025, 2026, then we're looking at things to do with what you can take away from everything that you've had as an experience about the foundations of my life are formed on these rocks. What does that give birth to? So you're going to be giving birth to a lot of things that are both in the sense of dreams that you've long had, but also based on the realities and the limitations of the situation about you and your life that you have expected. Jupiter, Uranus are going to be very important in this story as well. They're already important in the sense that lots of things that you're putting in place right now are making for change. You're doing things differently. And opportunities that are arising may take you into different fields, especially work-wise and with the way you work at life. But that's going to form the basis of the new world that you're going to be stepping into. And some of that new world and some of those opportunities are going to start in the May of next year, 2024, when Jupiter enters Gemini and therefore enters your opposite sign. It's going to introduce new people to you, whether these people are teachers and inspirers, and they help you to reform and bring structure to your dreams, so to speak. That Saturn-Neptune theme I've been talking about. It may mean that it's time to meet your other so that you form a soul connection, or you form a marriage, or you form a business partnership. You've met someone with whom you can grow. Remember, Jupiter is about growth, so that relationships help you grow as you go through from May 2024 through to May of 2025. Very good period to get married. Very, very good period to form business partnerships or partner up with people with whom you think your future can be benefited and different. So my conclusion has a lot to do with many of the things that I've talked about on your individual forecasts. And it's also something that has been increasingly evident over the last few months, I would say almost since last year sometime. Maybe it has, we could say Pluto and Aquarius. That's the signature on it, but I don't think it's Pluto and Aquarius. I think it's a combination of all the factors that we're looking at, where Saturn is, where Neptune is, where Jupiter is, where Uranus, Pluto, these big, big movers. So it's the combination of all those factors that is producing a common trend. Now we can see when we look out on the world, there's a lot of conflict and division. We can see that, whether we're looking at countries individually, nations divided, whether we're looking at wars and conflicts in different parts of the world. It's very much brought to our doorstep, this idea of division and conflict. And what's been so interesting in my work when I'm talking to my clients or people are writing into me, that so many people are finding division and conflict close to home. In other words, this isn't happening out there in the world. It's happening right inside your heartland. It's happening on home territory with your family. Now, in some cases, by home territory, we're looking at things to do with 4 square walls, your ability to have a home and the problems surrounding that and the divisions it's causing with the property itself, where you live. So there have been lots of challenges and upsets and divisions. But more often, and in a way, at least, you know, when we're talking about 4 square walls and finance, these are things that are out there and that we can realistically handle. Where it's more difficult is when ruptures, divisions, and conflict happen within the family. And this is what seems to be something going on at the moment all over the world, not with everybody, but with a great many people. And what I think we're seeing, and maybe it does have a Pluto signature to it, is this idea of what's unconscious becoming conscious. And so things that have been going on for years are now coming out into the open, and they're causing a lot of divisions, whether it's with sibling and sibling, parents with children, aunts, uncles, grandparents, whatever. And we're seeing things, you only have to look at the British royal family to see exactly what I mean, how all that upset is playing out and how destructive it is to the family, how painful it is to every single member of the family caught up with this. And this is happening all over the world, in homes all over the world. So it's what's unconscious, what's being hidden, what hasn't been talked about, what hasn't even people necessarily been aware of, now thrusting its way up into consciousness. And that's disturbing, destabilizing, and dividing. That's what's going on. It will settle down, but it's going to take time because, as I often say, the furniture's been rearranged and it doesn't look the same. Nothing looks the same. And we're seeing all sorts of things that we hadn't noticed before. And it's hard. There's also this idea of the greater family. We're looking at generations back. We're looking at karma, if you want. That's a matter of past lives, if you like. But there's a different kind of karma that comes from our preceding generations, however far back you go. That's reasserting itself. So we're having to deal with the events and the actions of generations ago. That's very hard because we're in a new world. We weren't necessarily expecting this, having to deal with it. So it takes a lot of humility. It takes a lot of patience. And it doesn't take, lifting your hands off the wheel and saying, okay, I'm not going to bother with this. You can't abdicate responsibility. But what I think you can do is recognize where it is applicable to allow things to go further forward freely, which may mean, not dealing with that situation until it becomes a little bit more where you can deal with it. It also means people finding their own level, discovering themselves, dealing with their own issues. This is happening to different family members. Again, it's much easier to look at it out, again, with Meghan, Harry, Charles, Camilla, Andrew, everything that's going on out there. In a way, each person going through this is answering to their own karma, answering to their own inner demons, the darkness, the things that have been kept buried. So it's each individual dealing with that. It's how that then plays out with other members of the family, opening old sores, bringing back events that caused irreparable harm. That's what we're all dealing with. So each member of a family that's in crisis or rifts, whatever it is, needs to deal with their own particular, I would say, issues, so much as the things that seem to be driving this division. It's their own thing. But also it's the changing nature of relationships within the family that everyone then has also to make adjustments to. And the things that happen, random things to members of the family that then upset the normal alignment of family, they have to be incorporated, lived with, and worked through. And I guess how well we do this is a measure of how well we as humanity go forward. Remember, we're seeing this on a large scale, global scale, as well as our individual scale. So thank you for staying with me. This has been a marathon, hasn't it? It's certainly been a marathon for me. But there's a lot of, well, I hope to be valuable stuff in there, and you can keep coming back to it and picking out bits and pieces that I hope you'll find relevant. And remember, you can get more information about astrology from some of the books I've written, particularly the Astrology Handbook, The Art of Interpretation, which really quite succinctly puts things together that help you navigate your own natal chart, help you navigate life in view of what's going on at this moment in time. Thank you for being with me, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.